The people who call someone a monster are often the ones who have never dared to look into the monster's eyes. Long before sunrise reached the stone rooftops of Silvercrest Kingdom, Olivia Bennet stood alone outside the village meeting hall with her hands folded quietly in front of her worn healer's cloak. At just 22 years old, the young Omega had already become the easiest person to blame whenever crops failed, storms lingered too long, or fear needed a face. She never argued with the whispers that followed her through crowded streets. She simply lowered her emerald green eyes and continued helping anyone who needed medicine, warm food, or a gentle smile. Even those who refused to thank her often found fresh herbs hanging beside their doors the following morning. On this cold autumn morning, however, the whispers felt different. Every villager had gathered in uneasy silence as members of the royal council arrived on horseback wearing silver cloaks marked with the crest of the Alpha Crown. No one welcomed them with celebration. Everyone already knew why they had come. The oldest council member slowly unrolled a parchment and announced that the monster king hidden beyond Blackstone Mountain had grown restless once again. Every healer, knight, scholar, and priest who had been sent to calm him had either returned defeated or had refused to go near the ancient castle at all. The kingdom believed that if the cursed ruler completely lost control of the ancient darkness sleeping inside him, every surrounding province would fall into endless fear. A heavy silence settled across the square until the council member spoke the next sentence. An Omega without rank, without family, and without influence has been chosen for this final mission. Every eye turned toward Olivia. Some villagers sighed with relief because it was not their child. Others quietly nodded as though the decision had always been obvious. One woman whispered that perhaps the curse would finally claim the girl everyone believed had brought misfortune since birth. Olivia heard every word, yet her expression never changed. She stepped forward with calm dignity and accepted the sealed royal letter. With both hands. "Will anyone tell me why I was chosen?" she asked softly. The council member avoided her eyes before answering. "Because there is nothing left for you to lose." The words lingered in the morning air long after the horses began their journey toward the northern mountains. Olivia looked back only once. The people she had spent years helping did not wave goodbye. They simply watched until she disappeared beyond the forest road. 3 days later, towering cliffs rose before her beneath a gray autumn sky. At their summit stood Blackstone Castle, its dark walls wrapped in ancient ivy and countless years of silence. Royal guards waited outside the enormous iron gate, their faces carrying the exhaustion of men who had guarded secrets far heavier than swords. One captain stepped forward and lowered his voice. "You still have time to leave. No one would blame you." Olivia gently shook her head. If everyone keeps walking away from him, then perhaps he has spent too many years believing he deserves to be alone. The captain stared at her in stunned silence before ordering the massive gates to open. The ancient hinges groaned like echoes from another age as darkness stretched beyond the entrance hall. Olivia took one steady breath and crossed the threshold without hesitation. Deep inside the castle, somewhere beyond endless corridors of stone, a pair of brilliant steel blue eyes slowly opened for the first time in many days, and the ancient curse resting beneath the Monster King's soul stirred as though it had been waiting for one gentle heart to arrive all along. Olivia Bennet expected to find chains, roaring echoes, and the terrifying presence described in countless fearful stories, but the silence waiting beyond the towering gates unsettled her far more than any monster could have. The entrance hall stretched endlessly beneath vaulted ceilings carved with faded symbols of wolves, moons, and ancient kings whose names had long been forgotten. Dust rested upon marble floors that had once reflected royal celebrations, while tall stained-glass windows allowed narrow beams of afternoon sunlight to spill across the empty corridors. Nothing about the castle suggested rage. It felt abandoned by hope instead. 2 royal guards escorted Olivia through the quiet halls without speaking until they reached a heavy oak door reinforced with dark iron bands. One of them finally broke the silence. "This is as far as we go." Olivia looked toward him with gentle curiosity. "Does no one ever enter?" The older guard slowly shook his head. "Only when His Majesty allows it, and he has not allowed anyone inside for many years." He hesitated before adding another warning. "If he tells you to leave, do not argue. If he remains silent, leave anyway." And if you hear the curse awaken, close the door behind you and pray." Olivia offered a grateful nod before placing one hand against the ancient wood. She pushed gently, expecting resistance. Yet the massive door opened almost effortlessly with a low creak that echoed through the chamber beyond. Warm firelight greeted her instead of darkness. The spacious room resembled a forgotten library more than a prison. Towering bookshelves lined every wall, hundreds of carefully preserved volumes filling shelves from floor to ceiling. A grand fireplace crackled softly, filling the room with comforting warmth. Fresh flowers rested beside an open window overlooking mist-covered mountains, and several unfinished sketches lay scattered across a large wooden table. Olivia blinked in surprise. Someone had been drawing wildflowers with remarkable patience and delicate detail. Before she could study them more closely, she sensed another presence nearby. She slowly turned toward the far side of the chamber, where a tall man stood quietly beside the window, his back facing her. He wore a simple black royal coat instead of ceremonial robes, and the afternoon sunlight illuminated his dark hair as the mountain breeze gently stirred the fabric around his shoulders. Without turning around, he spoke in a calm voice that carried neither anger nor hostility. "You are not the healer they usually send." Olivia answered honestly. "No, Your Majesty." Several long moments passed before he finally faced her. Olivia found herself looking into striking steel blue eyes that carried endless exhaustion beneath their quiet strength. His face showed no signs of cruelty, only years of loneliness carefully hidden behind calm restraint. This was not the terrifying monster described throughout the kingdom. This was a king who looked as though he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen without fear. Alexander studied Olivia just as carefully. Instead of the panic he had witnessed in every visitor before her, he found calm compassion reflected in her emerald green eyes. She did not step backward. She did not reach for protection. She simply remained where she was, as though standing before another human being instead of a legend. The unexpected silence lingered between them until Olivia noticed a fresh bandage wrapped around his left hand. A faint crimson stain had begun spreading through the white linen. Without thinking, she reached into the satchel hanging at her side and quietly removed clean cloth along with a small jar of herbal salve. "Your hand should be treated before the wound becomes worse," she said gently. Alexander looked down at the bandage with mild surprise before raising his eyes to meet hers once again. For the first time in many years, someone had noticed his pain before noticing his curse, and somewhere deep beneath the ancient darkness sleeping inside his soul, something long forgotten stirred with quiet recognition. Alexander Hawthorne remained perfectly still as Olivia Bennet approached with a small bundle of clean linen and fragrant herbs resting carefully in her hands. Throughout the years, countless physicians had entered this chamber carrying expensive medicines, enchanted relics, and solemn promises that they could lessen the ancient curse, yet every one of them had looked into his eyes with hidden fear. Olivia was different. She seemed far more interested in the small wound beneath the bandage than the frightening stories surrounding the man before her. She stopped only an arm's length away and gently lifted the fresh cloth. "May I?" she asked softly. Alexander hesitated, not because he feared her touch, but because he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be asked for permission instead of being treated as a burden to endure. After a long, quiet moment, he slowly extended his injured hand. Olivia carefully unwound the stained bandage, revealing a shallow cut across his palm that had reopened during another restless night. She examined it with calm concentration before applying the herbal salve using slow, practiced movements. The pleasant scent of lavender and mountain sage filled the room, replacing the lingering smell of old parchment and fading firewood. Alexander watched her without speaking. Her hands never trembled. Her breathing remained steady. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who measured people by their suffering instead of their reputation. "You learned this from the Royal Academy?" he finally asked. Olivia smiled faintly while securing the fresh bandage. "No, Your Majesty. My mother taught me before she passed away. She believed every wound deserves patience before judgment." Alexander lowered his eyes for a brief moment. Those simple words settled somewhere deep inside him with unexpected weight. No one had spoken about patience within these walls for many years. When Olivia finished tying the clean linen, she stepped back respectfully. You should avoid placing too much strain on your hand for a day or two. Alexander looked at the neat bandage and quietly flexed his fingers. The pain had already begun to ease. Most people spend their first meeting asking whether I truly become a monster, he said. You never asked. Olivia met his steel blue eyes with calm honesty. If I wish to know who you are, I would rather listen to you than to frightened rumors. For the first time and longer than he could remember, Alexander allowed the faintest hint of a smile to appear. It was almost imperceptible, yet it softened the loneliness that had long shadowed his face. Before either of them could speak again, a low vibration echoed beneath the stone floor. The books lining the towering shelves trembled slightly, and the fire within the great hearth flickered with an unusual silver glow. Alexander's expression changed instantly. The warmth disappeared from his eyes as though an invisible weight had suddenly returned. He turned toward the large window overlooking the northern cliffs where dark clouds gathered around the distant peaks despite the clear afternoon sky. It is happening earlier, he murmured quietly. Olivia followed his gaze, sensing an unfamiliar heaviness settle throughout the chamber. At the center of the room stood an ancient stone pedestal she had not noticed before. Resting upon it was a weathered iron crown engraved with faded crescent moon symbols. As the strange vibration continued, thin streams of pale silver light slowly emerged from the ancient markings, spreading across the stone like living roots searching for something they had lost centuries ago. Olivia stared at the mysterious glow in silent amazement, while Alexander's face grew pale with quiet resignation. Without taking his eyes from the awakening symbols, he spoke in a voice barely louder than a whisper. The curse has never responded to another person before. It only awakens when it recognizes someone connected to its beginning, and I fear it has been waiting for you all along. Olivia Bennet could not take her eyes away from the ancient crown as delicate streams of silver light continued flowing across its weathered surface like quiet rivers awakening after centuries of sleep. The symbols carved into the iron glowed with a rhythm that almost resembled a heartbeat, filling the chamber with an unfamiliar warmth instead of fear. Alexander Hawthorne stepped between Olivia and the stone pedestal almost instinctively, his calm expression hiding the concern growing inside him. You should leave this room, he said gently. If the curse has recognized you, I cannot predict what it will do next. Olivia looked at him with quiet determination instead of alarm. Has it ever harmed anyone simply for standing here? Alexander hesitated before answering. No. Then I will not leave simply because something is unknown. Her answer carried no defiance. It was spoken with the peaceful certainty of someone who had spent her entire life choosing compassion over fear. Alexander slowly lowered his eyes, realizing that every argument he had prepared dissolved before her quiet courage. The silver glow gradually faded until the chamber returned to its peaceful silence, leaving only the faint shimmer upon the ancient crown. Olivia stepped closer to the pedestal once more, studying the faded crescent moon engravings with careful attention. These symbols do not feel angry, she whispered. They feel unfinished. Alexander looked toward the crown with quiet surprise. No scholar, priest, or royal advisor had ever described the curse that way. For generations, everyone had spoken only of danger and darkness. Olivia spoke as though she could sense something entirely different beneath the surface. Before he could respond, a gentle knock echoed from the chamber door. An elderly steward entered carrying a wooden tray prepared with warm tea, fresh bread, and simple vegetable soup. The old man paused the moment he noticed Olivia standing beside the ancient crown. His eyes widened with disbelief before he quickly lowered his head. Your Majesty, he said carefully. The symbols have never awakened while another person remained inside the chamber. Alexander accepted the tray with a grateful nod. Thank you, Edmund. The elderly steward quietly departed, casting one final curious glance toward Olivia before closing the heavy door behind him. Alexander placed the meal upon the large wooden table. Please eat, he said. The journey through Blackstone Mountain is long. Olivia smiled politely before sitting across from him. As they shared the simple meal, the silence between them gradually became comfortable rather than uncertain. She noticed shelves filled with history books, astronomy journals, botanical sketches, and carefully preserved maps. You read all of these? She asked. Alexander nodded. When the world became too dangerous to visit, Books allowed the world to visit me. Olivia's gentle smile returned. Then perhaps you have traveled farther than most kings. Alexander looked at her with quiet amusement. You have an unusual way of seeing things. Perhaps, she answered softly. Or perhaps people have forgotten there is more than one way to see. The afternoon slowly slipped toward evening as golden sunlight stretched across the stone floor. Olivia wandered toward the open window where cool mountain air carried the scent of pine, trees and wildflowers blooming along the distant cliffs. Looking down into the castle gardens, she stopped in surprise. Hidden behind ancient walls was a magnificent courtyard overflowing with white flowers surrounding a circular fountain that no longer flowed. Every blossom appeared healthy except for one small section near the center where dozens of flowers had completely withered despite the rich soil around them. Olivia frowned thoughtfully. Those flowers are dying for the same reason this castle feels lonely, she said quietly. Alexander followed her gaze toward the silent garden. And what reason is that? Olivia continued watching the pale blossoms moving gently beneath the evening breeze before answering in little more than a whisper. They have been surrounded by life for years, yet something has kept them from receiving it, and whatever is happening to those flowers feels connected to the ancient crown. The fading sunlight lingered over the castle gardens as Olivia Bennet quietly descended the weathered stone staircase leading toward the silent courtyard below. Alexander Hawthorne followed several steps behind, watching her with growing curiosity as she moved through the neglected pathways with the practiced attention of someone who had spent years understanding living things that could not speak for themselves. The white flowers surrounding the dry fountain swayed gently beneath the cool mountain breeze, their delicate petals glowing softly beneath the approaching evening sky. Yet the closer Olivia walked toward the center of the garden, the more obvious the difference became. Every blossom nearest the fountain had begun to wither despite the rich soil beneath them. She knelt beside one of the fragile stems and carefully brushed her fingertips across a pale leaf. There were no signs of disease, insects, or damaged roots. Instead, she closed her eyes for a brief moment as though listening to something deeper than sight could reveal. Alexander remained silent until she slowly stood again. "What do you see?" he asked. Olivia looked toward the ancient fountain before answering. "Nothing here is dying because it lacks water. Something is preventing life from reaching it." Alexander turned his attention toward the cracked stone fountain that had remained dry for longer than he could remember. The spring beneath it disappeared many years ago. Olivia gently shook her head. Water does not simply disappear. Something blocked its path. Her quiet certainty stirred an old memory within Alexander. Without another word, he led her through a narrow passage hidden beneath flowering vines until they reached a forgotten archway carved directly into the mountainside. Behind it lay a small underground chamber illuminated by faint shafts of golden light filtering through narrow openings above. At the center of the room rested the source of the ancient spring, but instead of flowing freely, the crystal-clear water stood perfectly still beneath an enormous stone engraved with the same crescent moon symbols carved upon the iron crown upstairs. Olivia slowly approached the mysterious seal, studying every weathered line across its surface. She reached out carefully but stopped just before touching it. "This stone was never meant to imprison the water," she whispered. "It was meant to protect something." Alexander's expression grew thoughtful. "No one has entered this chamber since my grandfather's reign." Before either of them could continue, a soft metallic sound echoed through the room. Olivia looked down in surprise. Hanging beneath her healer's satchel was the small silver pendant her mother had given her as a child, a simple crescent moon resting upon a delicate chain. Until this moment, it had never shown anything unusual. Now it glowed with the same gentle silver light radiating from the ancient seal. Alexander stared at the pendant in astonishment. "That symbol," he said quietly. "It matches the royal crest from before the curse existed." Olivia carefully removed the pendant and held it above her open palm. The silver light grew brighter, and tiny streams of shimmering radiance drifted toward the stone seal before fading gently into its carved surface. A faint sound followed, almost like distant flowing water awakening beneath layers of forgotten stone. The chamber trembled ever so slightly before returning to complete stillness. Neither fear nor darkness filled the room. Instead, An unexpected feeling of peaceful anticipation settled around them. Alexander looked from the glowing pendant to Olivia's calm face, unable to ignore the growing truth unfolding before him. She had not been sent to destroy the curse, nor to survive it. Somehow, without understanding why, she carried a forgotten connection to the kingdom that had existed long before the Monster King, the ancient crown, or the lonely silence that had imprisoned both his castle and his heart for generations. The quiet anticipation surrounding the ancient chamber lasted only a few moments before the air itself began to change. A cool breeze swept through the underground passage, although no doors had opened, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and wildflowers that should not have existed beneath the mountain. Olivia Bennet slowly lowered the glowing silver pendant into her palm, watching as its gentle light pulsed in perfect harmony with the crescent symbols carved into the enormous stone seal. Alexander Hawthorne instinctively stepped closer to her, not out of fear for himself, but because every story preserved within the royal archives warned that the ancient curse always answered when forgotten powers began to awaken. Yet nothing about this moment resembled the terrifying legends passed from one generation to the next. Instead, the chamber felt as though it had been patiently waiting for someone to remember a promise that time itself had nearly erased. Without warning, a deep yet peaceful vibration echoed beneath their feet. Thin streams of silver light spread outward from the ancient seal, tracing elegant patterns across the stone floor until they surrounded both Olivia and Alexander in a wide circle that shimmered like moonlight reflected upon still water. Olivia looked down in amazement as the light stopped just beneath her boots. "It is not trapping us," she whispered. "It is inviting us." Alexander studied the glowing symbols with quiet disbelief. Every previous awakening of the curse had filled the castle with unbearable heaviness, but this radiant circle carried only warmth and calm. Slowly, the enormous stone resting above the silent spring shifted only a fraction of an inch. The movement was almost imperceptible, yet it was enough for a single stream of crystal-clear water to escape through a narrow opening and flow gently across the ancient floor. As the water touched the silver light, countless tiny reflections danced throughout the chamber like stars scattered across a peaceful night sky. Olivia knelt beside the flowing spring and dipped her fingertips into the cool water. The moment she did, a series of faint images appeared upon the shimmering surface. She saw a magnificent kingdom untouched by sorrow, a young king placing the crescent crown upon his head beneath a full moon, and beside him stood a graceful woman wearing a silver pendant identical to the one resting around Olivia's neck. Neither figure appeared frightened. They smiled at one another with quiet trust before the vision slowly dissolved into rippling light. Alexander stared silently at the fading images. "Those faces," he murmured. "I have seen them before." Olivia turned toward him. "Where?" Alexander closed his eyes as distant memories surfaced from stories told during his childhood. Inside the oldest royal portraits, they were the first king and queen before the ancient curse ever existed. Before either of them could speak again, the silver light surrounding the chamber brightened until it filled every corner with soft radiance. A gentle feminine voice echoed through the stillness, calm as the evening wind, yet carrying timeless authority. "The forgotten path has opened once more." Olivia and Alexander looked around the chamber, yet no figure stood before them. The voice continued with quiet compassion. "The crown was never created to command power. It was created to protect harmony between heart and kingdom. When fear replaced trust, the blessing became a burden." The glowing symbols upon the ancient seal slowly rearranged themselves into words neither of them had ever studied, yet somehow both understood their meaning. Alexander's expression gradually changed from confusion to realization as he whispered the final line aloud. "The curse awakens completely beneath the next full moon, and only the heart that chooses compassion over fear will decide whether the kingdom remains imprisoned by the past or is finally welcomed into a new beginning." The words left behind by the ancient voice echoed through the hidden chamber long after the silver light began to fade, settling quietly within both Olivia Bennet and Alexander Hawthorne like a truth neither of them could ignore. The gentle stream flowing beneath the enormous stone seal continued moving for the first time in generations, its crystal-clear water carrying a peaceful melody that filled the underground sanctuary with unexpected hope. Olivia slowly slipped the silver pendant back beneath her healer's cloak, yet its warmth remained against her heart, as though the forgotten blessing had not truly gone silent. Alexander remained motionless beside the ancient spring, his thoughts returning to every story he had heard since childhood. For years, he had believed the curse was born because one king had been consumed by darkness. Now every certainty he had accepted throughout his life had begun to crumble. If the blessing became a burden because trust was broken, he said quietly, then someone must have hidden the truth from every generation that followed. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. Fear has a way of rewriting memories until people forget how everything truly began. They slowly climbed the winding staircase leading back toward the castle above. Evening shadows stretched across the stone corridors as servants quietly lit lanterns one by one, filling the ancient halls with warm golden light. Although nothing appeared different on the surface, Olivia sensed the atmosphere inside the castle had changed. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt watchful, as though the walls themselves were waiting for something yet to come. Alexander led her into a forgotten wing of the royal library that had remained locked for decades. Dust rested upon towering shelves filled with weathered journals, royal records, and faded maps carefully preserved behind carved oak doors. At the far end of the room stood an enormous portrait covered by a heavy linen cloth. Alexander slowly pulled the fabric aside, revealing the first king and queen of Silvercrest Kingdom. Olivia immediately recognized them. The graceful queen wore the same crescent moon pendant now resting beneath her own cloak, while the king held the ancient crown before placing it upon his head rather than wearing it himself. Neither ruler displayed symbols of conquest or power. Instead, they stood hand in hand beneath a silver full moon surrounded by blooming white flowers identical to those growing within the castle gardens. Olivia stepped closer to the painting until she noticed a small inscription hidden beneath the frame. Time had faded most of the letters, yet several remained perfectly clear. A kingdom endures only while compassion guides the crown. Alexander read the words aloud before lowering his gaze. No one ever showed me this portrait. Every lesson I received spoke only of protecting the kingdom through strength. Olivia gently looked toward him. Strength and compassion were never meant to stand apart. Before Alexander could answer, the lanterns throughout the library flickered softly. A quiet breeze drifted through the room despite every window being closed. At the center of the portrait, the painted crescent pendant suddenly reflected a faint silver glow that matched the light hidden beneath Olivia's cloak. The old canvas slowly shifted aside without anyone touching it, revealing a narrow passage concealed behind the stone wall. Both of them exchanged silent glances before stepping inside. The hidden corridor led to a small circular chamber untouched by time. Resting upon a simple marble pedestal lay an unopened scroll bound with silver ribbon and sealed by the ancient royal crest that had disappeared centuries earlier. Alexander carefully lifted the fragile document, surprised that the seal broke apart almost effortlessly beneath his fingers. Inside, only a single sentence had been written in elegant silver ink that still shimmered despite its age. He read the forgotten message aloud with growing disbelief. The one who carries the crescent shall reveal that the monster king was never cursed because he was unworthy, but because one faithful heart betrayed another, and only the truth spoken before the next full moon can awaken the kingdom from its longest sorrow. Morning arrived beneath a sky washed in pale silver clouds, and although the next full moon was still one day away, the entire castle carried the quiet feeling that time itself had begun moving more quickly. Olivia Bennet stood beside the eastern garden where the white flowers surrounding the ancient fountain had started to bloom again after generations of silence. Only the blossoms nearest the center remained closed, their pale petals gently trembling whenever the cool mountain breeze passed through them. She rested one hand upon the weathered stone edge of the fountain, listening to the soft sound of the spring flowing beneath the castle once more. Behind her, Alexander Hawthorne approached without the formality expected of a king. During the days since Olivia's arrival, he had slowly begun setting aside the lonely habits that had defined his life. He no longer avoided the servants who faithfully cared for the castle, nor did he hide within the highest tower whenever evening approached. Yet one burden still remained visible in his steel-blue eyes. Olivia turned toward him with a gentle smile. "You did not sleep very much." Alexander returned the smile with quiet honesty. "I kept thinking about the scroll." He looked toward the blooming garden before continuing. "If the kingdom has believed a lie for centuries, how can one truth spoken tomorrow change everything?" Olivia slowly walked beside him along the stone path lined with white blossoms. "Because fear survives only while people believe it deserves to." Her calm answer lingered between them as they reached the center of the garden. The ancient fountain, silent for generations, suddenly released a stronger stream of crystal-clear water that rose gracefully into the morning sunlight before falling back into the basin with a peaceful melody. At that very moment, the silver pendant beneath Olivia's cloak began glowing once again. This time the light extended beyond the pendant, forming a delicate circle around both of them. Alexander instinctively stepped back, but Olivia gently reached for his hand before he could retreat any farther. "You do not have to face this alone anymore," she said softly. Her words carried no command, only quiet reassurance. Alexander looked down at their joined hands and realized something had changed inside him. For years he had believed protecting others meant keeping everyone at a distance. Now he understood that true protection sometimes meant allowing someone to remain beside him. The silver light surrounding them gradually spread across the garden until every unopened flower slowly unfolded beneath its warmth. Hidden beneath the blossoms nearest the fountain appeared an ancient mosaic that had remained buried for centuries. Olivia and Alexander knelt together to study the remarkable artwork. The polished stones depicted the first king and queen standing before the crescent crown, while countless people from every corner of the kingdom gathered around them. There were alphas, omegas, children, elders, farmers, healers, and soldiers, all placing one hand over their hearts rather than kneeling before the throne. Along the outer edge of the mosaic, elegant silver letters shimmered into view as though they had only been waiting for sunlight to reveal them. Olivia quietly read the ancient inscription aloud. "The crown serves the kingdom only when the king accepts every heart as worthy of compassion, including his own." Alexander closed his eyes as the meaning settled deeply within him. The greatest battle had never been against an ancient curse. It had always been against the belief that he needed to carry every sorrow alone. As the afternoon slowly faded toward evening, dark clouds gathered peacefully above Blackstone Mountain, and the first brilliant rays of the rising full moon appeared beyond the distant horizon. A familiar, gentle voice drifted across the quiet garden, unseen yet unmistakable. "When the moon reaches its highest place tomorrow night, the final choice will belong not to destiny, but to the king who has finally remembered that love cannot heal a heart unwilling to receive it." The final full moon rose above Blackstone Mountain with quiet majesty, covering Silvercrest Kingdom in gentle silver light instead of the fearful darkness its people had expected for generations. Every window inside the ancient castle remained open, allowing the cool evening breeze to carry the fragrance of blooming white flowers through halls that had once known only silence. Olivia Bennet stood beside the restored fountain in the eastern garden, where crystal-clear water now flowed freely beneath the moonlight. Around her, every blossom swayed peacefully as though welcoming the night they had patiently awaited for centuries. Alexander Hawthorne walked toward the ancient crown resting upon its stone pedestal at the center of the garden. For the first time since inheriting the throne, he wore neither armor nor the heavy ceremonial robes that had always reminded him of duty without comfort. He appeared simply as a man who had finally chosen to face the truth without hiding behind fear. Olivia quietly joined him, her silver pendant glowing with the same calm radiance reflected by the full moon above. Neither of them spoke immediately because no words could fully describe the peaceful certainty surrounding them. As the moon reached its highest place in the sky, the ancient crown began shining with brilliant silver light. The familiar warmth of the curse slowly surrounded Alexander, yet it no longer carried the crushing loneliness that had haunted every previous full moon. Instead, the light paused before him as though waiting for his decision. Alexander gently lifted the ancient crown with both hands and looked toward the countless white flowers blooming throughout the garden. He remembered every fearful story he had believed, every lonely night he had accepted as his destiny, and every wall he had built to protect others while quietly imprisoning himself. Then he turned toward Olivia, whose calm emerald-green eyes reflected neither pity nor expectation, only unwavering trust. Alexander smiled with peaceful gratitude before speaking clearly beneath the silent heavens. I choose compassion over fear. I choose truth over the burden of old lies. Most of all, I choose to believe that I am worthy of standing beside those who never abandoned me. The moment his final words faded into the night, the silver light surrounding the crown expanded across the entire garden like the first rays of dawn. Countless streams of shimmering radiance rose from the flowing fountain, the blooming flowers, and the ancient stone beneath their feet. High above them, the graceful figure of the moon goddess appeared one final time, her expression filled with quiet joy. She raised one gentle hand, and the ancient crown slowly dissolved into thousands of tiny lights that drifted upward before disappearing among the stars. The blessing has returned to the hearts of the people, she said softly. A kingdom was never meant to be ruled by fear. It was always meant to flourish through compassion freely given and gratefully received. As her radiant form faded into the moonlit sky, the last traces of the ancient curse disappeared with her, leaving only peaceful silence behind. Throughout the kingdom, church bells were absent, yet the great palace bells rang on their own, their joyful sound echoing across valleys, forests, and quiet villages. People stepped outside their homes in wonder as the moonlit sky seemed brighter than anyone could remember. In the days that followed, Alexander ruled not as the feared monster king, but as a wise King Alpha who welcomed every Alpha, Omega, and citizen with equal dignity and respect. Olivia continued serving as the kingdom's healer, never seeking recognition because kindness had always been her greatest purpose. Together they restored not only the castle, but the hope of an entire kingdom, proving that the deepest curse is never broken by power alone, but by the quiet courage to trust, to forgive, and to love without allowing fear to decide the future ever again. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts, like, share, subscribe, enable notifications, and join us for more unforgettable alpha romance stories ahead.